June 8th, 793 AD. Before sunrise, the island was quiet. Monks of Lindisfarne moved through stone corridors in the dark, candles in hand, voices low in Latin prayer. The North Sea murmured outside, cold, familiar, safe. By noon, the church was burning. Lindisfarne was not just a monastery, it was the monastery. Built in 635 AD by the Irish monk St. Aidan, it had spent 158 years becoming the most sacred Christian site in all of Britain. For 158 years, no one had crossed it. But on the morning of June 8th, something appeared on the water. What the monks saw that morning was different. Long, narrow ships, low in the water, moving fast, unnaturally fast, with no visible sails catching wind. Oars, dozens of them, cutting through the sea in perfect rhythm. The monk who first spotted them likely felt nothing more than confusion. Ships were normal. Visitors arrived by sea. Pilgrims came to Lindisfarne from across Britain and Ireland. He would have watched, perhaps called to a brother nearby, and then the ships turned toward the island. We don't know exactly how much warning they had. Historical sources give us no precise timeline of those final minutes, but we know what came off those ships. Armed men. People called them Vikings, but they were not born warriors. Most were farmers, traders, pushed to the brink by overpopulation and harsh winters. However, right now, on this beach, they were apex predators. The prior of Lindisfarne was a man named Higbold. He survived the raid, and in the aftermath, he wrote to Alcuin of York. He wrote, "Never before has such terror appeared in Britain as we have now suffered from a pagan race." Read that line carefully. Never before. By the way, the raiders reached the shore. The monks had nowhere to go. Lindisfarne is a tidal island, connected to the mainland only at low tide, cut off completely when the sea rises. Whether the tide was in or out that morning is unknown. What is known is that escape for most of the community was not possible. The attack was fast, focused, and completely without mercy. The attackers knew exactly what they were looking for. They went for the church first, the altar, the reliquary, the sacred chest containing the bones of Saint Cuthbert, one of the most venerated saints in all of Northumbria. They took the silver, the gold, the altar fittings, the crosses. Some monks were killed where they stood. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records it plainly, without decoration. The ravaging of heathen men destroyed God's church at Lindisfarne. Others were dragged to the shore. Some drowned. Some were thrown into the water and left. Others were taken onto the ships. We don't know their names. We don't know how many. The sources are not precise, but we know they existed, because Alcuin references them directly in his letter to Higbold, urging him to ransom any survivors if possible. Some of those monks were still alive on foreign shores, waiting. The attackers came from Scandinavia, most likely Norway. Beyond that, we don't know which specific group, which leader, which community. And that anonymity was part of the terror. They left no record, no explanation. They simply came, killed, and vanished. But historians have pieced together the logic of Lindisfarne as a target. These were not random raiders striking blindly. Monasteries across the North Sea coast were known to traders, and Vikings at this stage were primarily traders, seafarers, and merchants. They knew the coastlines. They knew where wealth accumulated. And Lindisfarne was famous. Its reputation as the holiest site in Britain meant its treasures were real, documented, discussed, even across the North Sea coast. It was also
completely undefended. What the raiders could not have fully anticipated was the symbolic devastation of what they were doing.
To them, perhaps, it was a wealthy, undefended target. To Britain, it was the center of the Christian world. The gap between those two interpretations is where the terror lived, and it did not end with Lindisfarne. In 794 AD, 1 year later, the monastery at Jarrow was attacked. Jarrow, where the Venerable Bede had written the ecclesiastical history of the English people. In 795 AD, raids reached the coasts of Scotland and Ireland. Iona, the monastery founded by Saint Columba, the spiritual heart of Celtic Christianity, was struck in 795, again in 802, and again in 806, when 68 monks were killed in a single assault. The raid on Lindisfarne was not an isolated event that happened and passed. It was the opening move of 2.5 centuries of Viking expansion across Europe. The monks who survived 793 AD did not know that. They had no way of knowing. They knew only that something had arrived from the sea that had no name, no precedent, and no mercy, and that it had come once. But in 875 AD, 82 years after the first raid, with Viking attacks intensifying across Northumbria and the monastery no longer defensible, the monks finally made the decision that would have broken every one of them. They left. They carried St. Cuthbert's coffin on their shoulders and walked away from the island that had been their world for 240 years, wandering for over a century before eventually settling in Durham, where Cuthbert's bones rest to this day. The monastery of Lindisfarne never fully recovered. The monks of Lindisfarne were not warriors. They were ordinary men who had chosen an extraordinary life. What makes Lindisfarne matter, beyond the facts, is what it reveals about how quickly the world can change. One morning, the sea is empty. By noon, everything you have built is ash and stolen silver. We are still asking the same question they were. How do you make sense of a world where the sacred is not protected? Alcuin never found a satisfying answer. Neither has anyone else. But how did Viking longships survive some of the most dangerous seas of the medieval world? You know what to do.
Hold on!